para deixar um recado para os engraçadinhos aqui da internet aí. Os caras estão se divertindo aí, para quem está acompanhando o streaming. Tá aí Ricardo Esteves e uma reza turma aí, já falaram que eu sou o Silvio Santos, que eu devia colocar o microfone na lapela. Uma hora vai chegar a vez de vocês aí, fica esperto. E então agora vamos fechar a última apresentação com o Paul Vanderlaan, que é o... acho que fecha esse dia de um jeito bem interessante, que ele também tem um mix de projetos de type design customizados e de varejo, que é uma coisa que vocês devem ter percebido. A gente falou muito hoje de projetos que são feitos por encomenda, projetos customizados, né, que são feitos a partir de uma demanda. E ele tem os dois tipos de projetos, né? Um dos mais recentes do jornal USA Today, que teve uma reformulação gráfica há alguns meses atrás. E ele vai falar um pouquinho disso, né, de como que é o escritório dele. Ele é formado em design gráfico também, ele dá aula na KVK, foi professor do César Puertas, lá no mestrado em type design no holandês. E com vocês, então, Paulo Vanderlaan.
Good afternoon. This is strange, and I'll try to talk slowly because I know many of you are using the translator, which I'm also very, very grateful for that it is possible. My Portuguese is really non-existent, so I won't even try to say one word in Portuguese, so I'm sorry. Context. It's a little bit of a pun, a wordplay. I mean, you're all designers, I assume. Not maybe type designers, but at least probably graphic designers or something in an area. So context is something that you always need to be aware of when you are a designer. I want to talk about it in my presentation now in about 3 levels. First, the context of within how you are designing a typeface. Okay, sorry. So context, how you are designing a typeface, or how I am designing a typeface, that's better to express it. Type design in itself is all about context, in the sense that making a typeface work, making one letter fit with the other one, because that's what type design is really about to me. Also means creating context, taking care of the context, or at least be aware of it and design all your other letters according to it. The third level of context is how your typeface eventually ends up being used. And this is something that we are always, well, not really much in control of. So this is usually the frightening part. So to start it off, I said it already in some other words, but to me, type design is not about designing letters. But type design is about designing text. Not every language on earth has the same meanings or the same words for type, typography, type design. What I just want to express in this way, that if you're going to design a bunch of letters that need to work as a typeface, you don't design individual letters one by one. You design them as a whole system. And this whole profession of type design is also so young, because 100 years ago there wasn't even probably wasn't even a word for type design. In the beginning of the 20th century, there were people drawing letters for foundries, for big foundries producing typesetting machines, but the whole profession of being a type designer really was not invented, you could say. At that time, technology, printing, even paper maybe, but especially designing letters, designing typefaces, was all one thing. So you can go even much more back than that, and I always like to start off with some classics. So, actually in Christian Cruz's presentation you might have seen already a glimpse of this. This is the original Trajan column in Rome. This is a slightly clearer picture. So it was revived in 1989 by Adobe, but this is one of the pinnacles, you can say, in Roman lettering. And it was produced in the 1st century, and the beauty about this, and this is I think also about the makers of this column were not only, it was not divided like one was making the type, one was making the inscriptions or the other things. It was all part of one thing. This is the book of Lindisfarne, which is a gospel from the 7th century in England, and the same thing applies here. This was not printed in type. This was calligraphy, illustration, but everything was part of one overall design, which I think for us now as graphic designers, sometimes we are very detached from the technology or the media that we are making our things for. You still have to go to a printer sometimes, and he will print your stuff on paper, and then you can only see the result. This is an example from the 16th century Germany, the Maximilian Fraktur. Again, illustration, typography, calligraphy, all part of one overall design. And even with the invention of type design, or the invention of movable type, so the invention of type as individual pieces of metal that you can put together to form words in the 16th century by Gutenberg. For a very long time, even then, people who were making the type and people who were producing the books, designing the books, they were all, many of them were just one person, or maybe 2 or 3, and they were working very closely together. So this is an example of Aldus Manutius from Venice. The book is called the Hypnerotomachia Polyphili. A very beautiful example of how type, and especially I think words, how typography here is part of how it is being executed. The shapes themselves are maybe a little bit crude because the technology was not perfect at that time. Paper was not perfect at that time. But if you look just at the monumentality of it, the elegance of it, it's even for today's standards still very, 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 very beautiful, I think. Garamond, also 15th century. Garamond was actually a printer, and he didn't design these typefaces. They were actually designed by, or cut by another guy, but they were all involved in one thing. So, type design is not about making a collection of beautiful letters, but type design is about making a beautiful collection of letters. These are the words of Matthew Carter, meaning the same thing. You should, one letter and is not an alphabet, of course, but making 2 letters, you should already concern yourself about how do they fit together and how are they actually spaced together. One of the things that I tell to my students also quite soon when they are going to learn about type design is that if you don't want to care about the white space of your letters, then there's not much use in designing the black space to start with. So spacing is just as an integral part of your design as making the black shapes. So to put this into a small sort of schematic scheme or a diagram, also showing like how I look at type. I decided to make this this overview. So there's a sans, a slab, and a serif in 3 different colors. And what happens when you mix them together all randomly? Of course, you can see this is not making a beautiful word image. You can see it in the colors, and you can see it in the text too. Even mixing different weights, it's still not a very balanced thing that you are looking at here. Even though the overall design, this is all just the slab serif, it still does not make a unity. Now this is the point where it usually gets interesting for people who are into graphic design, but don't really have already a very trained eye for typography. Because here the weight of the three individual styles is pretty much similar, but of course the styles are still different. So the serif, the slab, and the sans. So for an untrained eye, this might still already look maybe pretty nice. And some of the discussions that I have with my graphic design students, when they start drawing type and start making their first attempt at making type, usually are around this. How can you make sure that the details really fit together? And then maybe on a second level again, this is really talking only about the tiny nuances in weights. This is the level how I discuss usually type with my students in the master's course. So the type and media master's course that Cesar and Marina Shakur went to. You learn already very well to draw type, to take care of words, but still by tiny differences in color or details, and this is what the discussions are about usually. And this is the goal event, what you want to achieve in type design. So, of course, being a type designer alone, producing typefaces out of the blue, doesn't make sense to me. I think it's you're part of an industry, or part of at least a discipline which involves graphic design. So the people who are going to use your typefaces, who are going to use my typefaces, they say, or they are just as much telling about the quality and the beauty of the work as just my typefaces alone. And I think especially if you compare where I come from in the Netherlands and Brazil here, we have a very strong culture in graphic design already in the Netherlands. So we have graphic designers who know about good type. So they will also acknowledge at the right points or at the right moments when maybe when they are out of their depth, so they don't really know enough anymore about typography, and they need to hire an expert, a type designer. And I think if you want to start creating a healthy environment for type design, the first thing that you need to take care of is creating a healthy environment of graphic design, good graphic designers. So I was happy to collaborate with many talented graphic designers during the, let's say 10 years that I work now professionally as a type designer. This is one example, a project for Studio Dunbar in Rotterdam, and they designed an identity for a choir, the Netherlands Chamber Choir. This is the concept that they came up with to me when they said, like, well, this is the furthest we can come, and this is how well, we think this can work as typography. Only this looks crap because we just took an existing typeface, we gave it some strokes, we took away some parts, and yeah, can you make this work? So I'd be a bad businessman to say, well, no, I cannot make it work. So of course you say, sure, let's see what we can do. And because they took an existing typeface, first thing you're going to do is look, well, can this work with the typeface that it chose, or does it need to be adapted? And eventually, it's also a little bit about my pride maybe, but I reworked the whole thing. There was, it might look in many details still, or in image, in appearance, quite similar still. But the most important part was to make it work in terms of the white space again. But the white space here was not the spacing, but the space within the letters, because these are very thin lines, of course. And coming up, therefore, with a series of 3 typefaces that could just be combined very easily, and was also, the style was reflected in the logo again, which I drew for them after I did the typefaces. So here are the 3 styles. And for instance, looking at that lowercase g, the original typeface just had a normal closed part underneath at the G. And especially for this purpose, or to make this work in outlines and strokes, I thought it would be much better to open it up. So this is how I made some of my own examples to just show it to the client. This is how it's going to look like. And this is the context of how they ended up using it. And this makes me happy again too, seeing that they still took some liberties. So you can see they extended maybe some of the strokes, but really tightly integrating image and typography again. Another example. So the type itself speaks clearly. It also integrates very nicely just with the pictures itself. And the whole concept was also about, because it's a choir, so people singing air, therefore the open, a lot of the big white spaces within the type. And they also produced some really nice movie with it. This was to introduce the new identity. So just being able to cooperate with great graphic designers, great animators to produce eventually a thing like this makes me very happy. Another client for a cultural client. So the choir was also they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of resources, but it still was very nice to do such projects for. The Carré Theatre in Amsterdam is the most well-known theatre in the Netherlands, and I know the design agency who work for them. It's Tonic in Amsterdam. Most of the posters of this this theatre are designed not by the graphic designers at Tonic, but just in-house in the theater, and they made some templates for them already a long time ago, and this was how they looked like until like roughly 1 year ago. A big red background with some very simple typography, just in announcing the what was at that moment playing in the theater. And this is not the most refined kind of typography. It's very straight, in your face. But the main objective with the designers at Tonic, and I shared it greatly with them, is the fact that this is Thesis Sons by Lucas de Groot. It's a beautiful typeface, but for use on posters in sizes like this, it doesn't really work, unfortunately. And it's about just the context of how it's being used, of course. The theater chose to use it initially because it was the corporate typeface of their main sponsor. So money also plays a bit of a role with these kind of decisions sometimes. So we tried to figure out, like, well, how can we change this? And this is on the top the logo of the theater, which was designed already, I think, like 7-8 years ago. Made to look like it's from the 1920s, 1930s, the heyday of vaudeville, of cabaret, all the things that the theater itself also likes to relate to again. So the designers at Tonic asked me, like, well, this is the logo. Is it possible maybe to make a typeface that is just based on these 4 letters, or 5, but the R is double, of course, and can you do it cheaply? And I thought, like, well, yeah, let's see. So it happened that I had already produced a typeface for another project years and years earlier, which is the one that you see here in the middle. And I am also very, very fond of making inline versions of typefaces. Don't ask me why, it happened long time ago. And usually I can't escape doing them. But so I said to the people in Amsterdam at Tonic, I said, like, well, I have this typeface and I think it's probably not so much work to adapt it to make it look like this. And you know what, I think it's also a very good idea to include this inline version, just to make that one too. And they said, like, well, if you can do it cheaply, go ahead. We'll give you. They could give me some price for it, of course, so some money. Now, as I already mentioned with the project for the choir, where I also redrew and reworked the whole typeface, I couldn't really resist doing the same thing here, which is nice as an exercise, but from a business point of view, not really the best thing to do. So this is the typeface that I had already made, and this is the typeface for the theater eventually. Now it doesn't. Well, basically every single character that you see here is or has been changed in some way or another. Weight, of course, is the first thing. You'll notice this weight is a little bit bolder, but also all the proportions are different. Certain shapes have been completely made different. Because the moment that I started adjusting just these 4 letters for these 4 letters here to match the logo, almost all the other letters that I had drawn in my alphabet didn't really seem to fit anymore. And I should have known this. But I was also a little bit too eager to do this project, and I was able to produce it on time, and we even managed to produce the inline version very, very nice. From a business point of view, also a bad idea. This is taking, or you have like a normal outline, the ones here, which are already, well, take some time to draw. Now, imagine that you have like 4 times the amount of points making an inline version for every glyph again. So you cannot really automate it very much. It's a very subtle play of black and white again. But I was happy to pull it off anyway. And so this is how it looks like in also the official colors of the theatre, the inline version. And these are the posters as how they should look like now. I say should. Because as I said before, they have not their own designers at the theatre, or the people working at the theatre make the posters based on my templates. And these sometimes want to bend the rules a little bit. But these were the designs made by the designers at Sonic in order to give examples to the theatre how to make their posters. Still very simple, very in your face, as you can say, but still now a much bigger unity, at least in graphic language. So the logo, in the previous posters, they always mentioned their own name in the other typeface with of course just an accent. Now they could incorporate the logo without any problem within the typography itself. So this is again a big win. They don't need to put it in another place somewhere like they did before, just on top of the poster. This is how I found it a few months back. I was a little bit disappointed. And it's maybe not a big crime, but first of all, I'd like to point out that I made this very, very nice IJ combination, which is a separate sound in Dutch. So we are very used to actually seeing it also in such a composed or pre-composed shape. And I don't know why they changed it. You see, I built in an OpenType feature that automatically takes care of this. You know, it's by default it should just work. And probably some designer thought like, no, should we just an I and a J next to each other? No combined thing. And of course they spaced the second words. They spaced it really badly. They gave it some negative tracking because it should look a little bit more airy, a little bit more elegant by default. So dealing with graphic designers, talented graphic designers, or at least being able to cooperate them is one thing. But sometimes you do projects for clients, and this is one example where you're not dealing with graphic designers only, but also with marketing people or people from the company which are more in a sort of a manager position. Maybe this is very common for you, but to me as a type designer, I'm very much used just to deal with graphic designers. I guess I'm in a very sort of privileged position. So instead of having a talk with a graphic designer about how to make this corporate typeface, we started off with a briefing that looked like this. And it was strictly confidential, not anymore, don't worry. So you don't have a conversation about, well, we need a slightly industrial looking typeface with maybe features like this or this or this. You get diagrams, you get charts, you get all kinds of marketing lingo, which I have not the faintest clue about what I actually try to say here, but it looks really expensive. They probably charge way more money for it than I would actually get as a designer. So you try to translate this, and you try to create your own kind of world, and discover things like, well, how can I solve this project? So you get to delve into history about the company, see some of the exciting and cutting edge designs that they made in the past. Beautiful, huh? And you also get to see some patterns. There's something going on with cars and especially women. So so when I say we, because me and Peter, my associate, we did this project together. So we're both type designers. So we set out sketching our first ideas after making this inventarization about looking, well, it's a car company, it tries to be sporty, it tries to be sophisticated, it tries to be a little bit technological. So this is an example of just one of the first sheets, one of the first sketches, just looking at, well, what is the field, what is the design space, as Cesar also mentioned in his lecture. And from this point you try to sketch your first shapes and add a whole lowercase alphabet, some capital shapes. That's also what they were asking from us, to present a bunch of lowercase, a bunch of capitals first. And so we came to this. We produced it also in a little booklet, because we were asked to come up with a complete presentation for them in about 6 weeks' time. And so in these 6 weeks we had to produce a couple of versions, a couple of weights of the typeface, and at the same time also produce a full presentation, which we were not allowed to attend ourselves, which is a very scary thought. So we thought, like, well, maybe we should just try to intimidate as much as possible and give them a booklet which looks just very, very finished. Also a typeface which looks very, very finished. And just say, well, you know, this is your typeface. We're done, basically. And of course you incorporate all the words that they like themselves. So all the text that we took are from all the multinational Audi websites. And we highlighted all the expensive models. The R8, which is like a crazy expensive sports car that they produce. And at the same time, because this appeals very much to us, at the same time we also try to hit them back with their marketing lingo. So we came up with some PDFs, some diagrams, we also tried to use many of the words that they used in their original briefing, and give it some kind of illustration, and just to communicate that we understood the briefing. And so this whole process, we were still not being selected as the designers. This was part of a pitch. So it means that together with 3 other type designers or type design companies, we were in a pitch to win this project. So after this was being sent to Berlin, where we just had to wait and had to see if they would come to a conclusion. After many more weeks, as expected, we suddenly got an email back. We were, of course, very, very nervous initially when we sent it to Berlin. Then after a few weeks we sort of lost faith. We thought like, well, this is probably going nowhere. And then they responded and they said, well, they were not talking to us in marketing lingo anymore. They found some kind of poetic way to talk to us. And especially this middle sentence. This middle sentence, I think, is very a good illustration of this. That they said like, well, we like your design. Yeah, it has a lot of good things, but and then so you can already sense the energy of an Audi before it starts to move. Wow. So can you transfer this feeling into the typeface too? Yeah, so luckily we could also talk to some other designers who were involved in the project, and they at least they could explain like, well, can you make it a little bit more angular? It was a little bit too soft, a little bit too humanistic. So this is the revision that we made. So initially, in our first version, we tried to incorporate as many things that we thought were very stylish, were very sophisticated, and eventually from the client, they wanted something a little bit more simple, or maybe a little bit more plain looking than we thought they actually needed. And this is, of course, the whole thing about making a custom typeface. It's a collaboration. You cannot say to the client like, well, no, I don't think you need a plain typeface. You need to get a sort of a dialogue going on, trying to find out what it is exactly that they're aiming for, and try to translate this into your type design. And one of the main things, of course, was their logo, because during the whole process of making this corporate typeface also involved that I changed their logo. The 4 rings, which I have already since ages, were not going to change, but the word itself, the typography of the words, would be completely new, and it would also be completely just one of the versions of the typeface that we were going to produce. So this was the first version, which we thought was really pretty. The second version, they asked us like, well, can you make it wider? And we said, yeah, sure, wider, a little bit, like also a little bit more plain looking or squarish. Then they asked like, well, can you make it a little bit more wider? Sure. And then, yeah, well, maybe still a little bit wider. You've probably been into this position too, that you make something for a client and they want the logo every time bigger. Well, this is sort of the same thing. This is how it is being used now. So the typeface, there are 8 versions of the typeface. 4 of them are extended in style, so meaning very, very wide. That's this version here, the bold extended and the normal extended. And it's also possible to use this as a identity system already in itself, which was for them a big money saver, because up until that time they had to make their logo types as separate EPS files or separate JPEG files, and now they could just use the typeface, 2 styles of the typeface, combine them together with the right color, and voila, you have your logo type for another division of the company. And in a similar way, we took really great care of adjusting the caps and the numbers to each other, so that every time they would write one of their model numbers, which is basically always an A or an R, and in some cases now a Q, but it's always like combined with a number. And I hope you can see we try to match them as best as we can in order to create also some smaller kind of logo types again. It's something that they didn't really ask themselves, but during the process of making this as a typeface system for a whole company, you suddenly realize that you should do that. So we delivered some of the early versions to the client after like 6 months of work when we got a job, and then of course you are just very curious to see it used, because we of course know we had the briefing, we had also our own ideas how to make it. So this was one of the first pictures, and we started looking further, and then you start to see the same pattern coming up again and again with women and type, or women and cars, I mean, even though it was not always really rowdy. You see the same typeface being used or the typeface being used with the old typeface. Here too, we continued in the meantime developing the italics, also in four styles. We thought the same thing with the italic as with the Roman. So because the Roman already became quite plain and quite straight, we tried to make this one quite feminine, and eventually they still wanted to have it quite plain looking, which is a shame, I think. This was really a good idea, I think, to try to diversify it a little bit more. Cyrillic, Greek, we had to design for many languages, of course, optimize it for screen. This was also done eventually by Lucas de Groot, but we did the first steps. An example of how it looks on the iPad now in their magazines. So this is the Audi magazine on iPad. Even though we try to make sure that this typeface looks very, or performs very well in smaller texts, I don't really think that this is a very elegant way of making an electronic magazine. I think it would be better here to hire another designer to come up with, or at least to have some other typefaces too, with maybe a little bit more flavor to make this. On the other hand, these are the pictures that we really want to see. This is, to me, like one of the best examples of seeing your own typeface in use in very sporty and very prestigious sort of environments. A football tournament, more girls. And you thought I would be here to show you a picture of a Brazilian football player. Well, you are wrong. This is not about a Brazilian football player. So in total we designed about 5,500 glyphs. So this is the overview of where we left it, what was it, 2.5 years ago. Some other companies or some other parties will also add Chinese or the Asian scripts to it, We don't do that. One thing that I also want to talk about is the Futura Today that we made for USA Today. This started off as a really small project, completely different to what Cesar told you about Republica. We were asked initially just by a branding agency in New York to work on the logo of USA Today, just to make a bunch of caps based on Futura. And when we did that, the second step they asked, like, well, okay, we have the logo. We also thought it would be good to combine it with some words like news and money and sports, all sections in the newspaper. So can you maybe make us a full collection of uppercase glyphs and numbers? So we thought, like, yeah, sure, no problem. They were already designing a complete graphic language for the identity, the numbers, so that they could set the dates. Then they came back and said, like, well, you know, we have the bold, this bold version, but we think we also need an extra or a light version. Can you make that too? And yeah, sure. Why not? This was all based on Futura, and we came. So after we made those caps, they started saying, can we also have lowercase? And it's like, yeah, lowercase, sure. Why not? And you start to look at Futura, and the caps are quite simple shapes, but the lowercase of Futura is very, very distinctive, of course, in its design. So I said here, like, Futura is maybe not a typeface anymore, but a brand, because there are so many typefaces out there now. If you're going to look at my fonts and you're going to search for Futura, you find tens of versions of Futura produced by different foundries that are also quite different, usually in detail, and some of them are really, really hideous. And I hope you can see already some of the differences here in the light. I think in the bold, having 3 different versions of them, you can see even more dramatic differences, especially how, for instance, terminals sometimes can differ greatly, or just the detailing of those shapes. Some of are very, very ugly. So we went through a whole process in order to make this Futura for USA Today look like a really proper typeface that we think would also be respectful to the original Futura. And although it changed, of course, in some aspects. And one thing was the ascenders and descenders. So in comparison to the original, it has much shorter ascenders and descenders. We also looked at the geometry. Futura is, of course, a very, very geometric design from how it was conceived. And I hope it's still clear here on the beamer, but in our examples, or looking on my own machine, these bunch of O's in one of the digital versions, the Adobe digital version of Futura, they are not really very, very nice circles anymore. They are being they're maybe a little bit too narrow, or maybe a little bit too wide, or sometimes you can see here this B is actually narrower than the O. So this was all something that we wanted to correct and to introduce, or at least to make sure it was all consistent. Then the whole thing with the terminals. So terminals are these details here. We made an inventarization. And you can see, like in the original Futura of Adobe, you have 3 different kinds of terminals. Ones that do end completely horizontally, or vertically, and some that end diagonally, which is for a type, making a typeface work sometimes a little bit too much. And you can also see between the light and the bold versions, these terminals are also sometimes not the same thing anymore. So we got rid of one kind of terminal in the lowercase. So you can see in Futura today we made just two kinds of terminals. In the numbers we maintained actually another one. But still, by doing this, we thought we improved the consistency quite a bit, especially making sure that the weights would match very well. Here are some other differences, for instance, where the capital J in the light version is sticking out. There are some different treatments for the endings of the Q and the 7. Especially here, I think it's quite clear what is different. So yeah, this is all then a candidate for improvement, which I'd really love to do. So this is then Futura today. Some things that I would say are a little bit unsuccessful in Adobe Futura. So some very strange looking symbols for copyright registered and trademark, because these do not relate to the original Futura at all. They are from completely different design. This ampersand is really looking very quirky and unelegant. The euro symbol doesn't really match the C or the roundness of those characters at all. So yeah, this is also things that you take with you when you're going to make this custom version for a client. So this is how they look now in Futura today. We did change some of the distinguishing shapes in Futura, which were really on request of the client, and I would rather have kept them, especially I like this very simple shape for the U and for the Y, and the T is maybe a little bit too aggressive now for modern day usage, but they were changed. So this is how they look now. Numbers. So we made two sets of numbers for each weight in proportional spacing and in tabular spacing, because while we were doing the project, it only grew and grew and grew. So they started, first they just wanted it to be in 4 sections, just for some simple headlines. Next thing they told us, like, we want to use it for small, for graphics in the newspaper, for maybe just also in very small sizes. And by the way, can you make us actually 2 more weights in between? Because yeah, the light and the bold are nice, but not very useful in small sizes. So this is how a very small project, how it started initially, ended up making 4 versions of a typeface, different weights with a very big character set, being used in many different parts now of the newspaper, and also on the online edition, in sizes, or at least in applications that we first really did not imagine. The nice thing though is that by doing that, the whole design of the newspaper has, I think, gained a lot of consistency again. So the graphic language that they introduced with the balls also is very directly related to the design of Futura. So here a weather chart where they use the typeface now in, what is it, 4 points or so, which is crazy. We had to rework the spacing 2 weeks before the deadline, because they said, like, yeah, we tried to use it in 4 points and it's much too tight. Yeah, what do you expect? We initially made it just for headlines. But it's we managed it. Here you can see a good use of the tabular figures, and this is how they introduced it also to the world this summer. So, last few remarks about some of the other typefaces that we do, just our retail typefaces. Our website, boldmonday.com. You have the specimen in your goodie bag. This is a new design that we just released 1 week ago. Because we try to, the work that we do for clients, the custom typefaces are usually more the workhorse kind of typefaces. So with Bold Monday as a foundry, as just a sort of a label where we can release designs, we try to release more maybe offbeat, a little bit more quirky designs that we think are still crazy enough to present to the world. Christian also mentioned polychromatic or multicolored typography. It's possible here. And these are some of the other designs that we offer. Litty being used in Writer on iPad. So if you want to get a copy very cheaply, just buy Writer on iPad or OS X. This typeface you're probably already quite bored of by seeing it all day. And I'd like to just finish with one last quote by another famous person. If something isn't right, you can't just ignore it and say that you'll fix it later, because that's what other people do. Steve Jobs. So in my best Brazilian, I will say, muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think it's good to see a mix of projects that we let's see, custom typefaces and then retail typefaces as well. I'd like to ask you one thing. When you said that our typefaces are only as good as the designers who are using them, did you ever refuse a job or a client based on that?
No. No, I think when a job comes in, sometimes it feels like a job which, well, let's say, no, I think when people already come to us to have a typeface produced, it's already, they know they will pay quite a bit of money. This is not work that you can do very quickly, so making a custom typeface is already something quite exclusive. So the chances are not big that you get to work with people who are not very clear about what they want, or at least they are aiming for a high quality already. They come to you because they know you can make it. So I think it depends also on what kind of style you become known for. I mean, other people like Laan are always very much known for the script typefaces, so people will come to him if they want a script typeface. If they would come to me to have such a typeface produced, I would really have a hard time, yeah. So, yeah.
Paul, it's really stunning work for USA Today. It's really beautiful, all the way from the font design to the way it's used in print publication, all the way to how the whole branding system works. And I would really like to know, how involved does your studio get in actually showing the designers how to use the typefaces in context? Do you ever get that far, as well as as far as showing it in use and tables and charts and so on?
Yeah, with USA Today, we were lucky to have a very, we were in direct contact with the design team of the newspaper. So that was also why they as soon as they changed their minds, we would be having weeks of more work to do because they wanted to have more weights or whatever. So, of course, the thing about that they changed the sizes suddenly to 4 points was something that I thought like, well, couldn't you have thought about that earlier? So in a sense, still I noticed that certain concepts about how we think about typefaces, that this is really meant for bigger sizes. You still should be very specific to tell that to the people who are using it. And but for the rest, we had like really good relationship. Just that they would have this test document, and we would send a new version, and they would send the test document back, and we would especially be able to work on very small details. The kerning, especially, we were looking at a lot of American names, for instance, very common names, made sure that it always looks good. Obama, we had to check it like 10 times. Luckily it was not wrong.
Just one last thing. Do you think that for Futura today, if you designed the whole family from scratch, from the beginning, at the beginning of the project, would it be the same? Or do you think it would be in a completely different path? Was the start design one way and then one more?
When we started with the project, actually, they weren't really sure about whether it would be Futura, and my reaction was also like, well, why would you actually choose for Futura if you can also get something completely custom made? But they were very strong. They had very strong feelings about this, and I think if we would have started. If we would have known directly from the start the scope, yeah, I'm sure it would have looked different, because many of the decisions that we made initially were just based on a very small context that we had at that time. And of course we adjusted some things in order to make it work also later on. But I always like to think ahead instead of just trying to fix things eventually. So. And it was a very, very tight schedule too. I mean, like I said, we had only a few weeks left before they wanted to have the intermediate weights done and also spaced for smaller sizes. That's working for American clients. So yeah.
As far as I can see, they were not pretty sure about the decisions at the beginning, because they asked for one thing and then I think in a sense you help them to make it like one direction or another.
Yeah, I think one big difference here was that Wolf Rollins, who did the redesign, they are not newspaper designers. So if we had dealt with real newspaper designers, I'm sure they would have already from the start said like, can you make sure that it looks good on 4 points too? But these are just Wolf Rollins was mainly concerned about branding USA Today in a completely new and fresh way, and I think this is something that they pull off very successfully because they are really sort of outsiders. They didn't really adhere to many of the conventions of traditional newspaper design.
Thank you, Paul, again. One more. And then now we're going to the panel discussion. Agora podemos mudar para português. A gente vai voltar agora à mesa aqui da mesa redonda, vamos diretão já.